I'm here today as the truth.
The $10 billion truth was out, but the final, terrifying confrontation was still waiting by the elevators. The air conditioning hummed a low, expensive song. Clara sat alone in the penthouse office. It was 2 o'clock in the morning in the Bahamas. The view outside was a smear of inky ocean and distant cruise ship lights. Her throat felt tight, dry from stale airport coffee. The 20-foot windows reflected the glow of her dual monitors. The room was all minimalist concrete and soft Italian leather. It felt less like a workplace and more like a mausoleum for money. She was not supposed to be here. She was the outside consultant, hired to reconcile the minor discrepancies. Discrepancies were now a canyon. For 7 days, she had been digging. The higher she went up the chain, the colder the data became. She had bypassed the primary accounting dashboards hours ago. Now she was deep within the segregated liquidity logs. The spreadsheet was named simply, delta_final_internal. Her finger hovered over the file icon. The silence was absolute, broken only by the distant, rhythmic crash of waves below the cliff. Clara could smell the salt and the faint, sweet scent of newly spilled rum from a party yesterday. Her heart began to beat against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She double-clicked the file. A single, massive cell populated the center of the screen. It contained one number. It was formatted in red, bold, and centered. The number was preceded by a minus sign. -10 billion. She had expected millions, perhaps 100 million. Not this impossible figure. Not 10 zeros. A wave of nausea washed over her. The expensive leather chair suddenly felt slick with cold sweat beneath her hands. Her breath hitched, caught in her chest like shattered glass. $10 billion. It was not a debt. It was not a liability. It was a hole. It meant the money was not just spent, or misplaced, or temporarily lent. It meant the entire sum had vanished, completely and untraceably. She reached out, her hand shaking violently, to touch the screen. The glowing red numbers seemed to pulse, a siren of disaster. A small, metallic thunk echoed from the hallway outside her closed door. Clara froze completely, muscle turning to stone. She was certain she had locked the main door on arrival. The hum of the air conditioning seemed to vanish. There was only the terrible clarity of the number and the absolute panic in her ears. She dared not move. Someone was in the hallway. The sound was repeated, closer this time, like a key turning softly in the heavy steel lock. She knew then that the minor discrepancies were no longer her only problem. The cold, hard truth of the collapse was now standing right outside her door. She had seen the hole, and someone had seen her. The lock mechanism scraped, slowly giving way. Clara slowly slid her hand toward the steel letter opener on her mahogany desk. She could not call the police. She could not run. She was trapped between 10 billion reasons to disappear and a figure emerging in the dark. The door began to push inward, heavy and silent. A long, narrow beam of hallway light sliced across the dark office floor. The figure stepped through the aperture. It was a tall man, silhouetted against the dimmer light of the corridor. His face was obscured, but his posture was unnervingly relaxed. He wore dark, expensive clothes. No sound came from his movement, despite the thick carpet. Clara held her breath, tasting copper on her tongue. She felt the cold, hard weight of the letter opener in her grip. It was not much, but it was something. The man paused, his eyes scanning the room quickly, efficiently. They landed immediately on Clara. He did not seem surprised. He raised one hand slowly. In his palm, catching the light, was a keycard. He had used a master key. He took a single, deliberate step toward the desk. The movement broke the spell of silence. "Clara," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone. It was familiar. Too familiar. It was the voice of the chief operating officer, a man named Marcus. He was supposed to be in Miami. Marcus smiled then, a flash of white teeth in the gloom. It was not a friendly smile. You should not have opened that file, he stated, his tone conversational. His eyes flicked past her, settling on the screen. The red, bold number was still blazing. -10 billion. He sighed, a sound of weary resignation, not surprise. A rather poor password, was it not, he mused, referencing the spreadsheet name. Clara realized the danger was not sudden violence, but cold, methodical calculation. She knew too much. She was not just a witness, she was a threat to the whole itself. She gripped the letter opener tighter, knuckles white. She looked past Marcus, past the open door. Escape was the only option, but the elevator was 50 feet away. Where is the money, Marcus? She asked, her own voice steady, though her body trembled. It was a foolish question, born of panic and disbelief. He only tilted his head, amused. The money is where the risk is managed, Clara. Or unmanaged, as the case may be. He moved again, faster this time, reaching into the inner pocket of his dark jacket. The metallic sound was different this time. Clara did not wait to see what he pulled out. She lunged, not at him, but to her right. She knocked the monitor off the desk with a crash. The glowing red number vanished into a spray of plastic and glass. The sudden, violent noise was a shock wave in the quiet room. She scrambled backward, pulling the chair with her, creating a momentary barrier. Marcus cursed under his breath, stepping over the wreckage. The element of surprise was gone, replaced by a brutal confrontation. She felt a sharp pain in her ankle as she twisted it. But she was moving now, toward the wide, reflective windows. Her only path was away from the door, toward the terrifying drop. The cold glass met her back. She pressed herself against the window, heart hammering against the pain. The distant ocean now looked inviting, a black velvet blanket. Marcus stood still, his hand now holding a sleek, silver smartphone. He was not reaching for a weapon. He was recording. Clara, this is the part where you try to make an escape, he said, the baritone voice now carrying a false, performing edge. She understood the chilling implication. He was staging a scene. He wanted her desperation to look like guilt. He needed her to look like the one who was running. The whole is already public, Marcus, she retorted, desperation fueling her words. She gestured vaguely at the crashed monitor, the digital evidence destroyed. It is a matter of hours. He shrugged casually, as if debating the stock market, not a $10 billion crime. Perhaps. But one loan consultant vanishing with the laptop will certainly muddy the waters. He took another slow step. The letter opener felt ridiculously small. She tasted the fear, acrid and metallic. Clara noticed something else. On the windowsill, tucked into the corner, was a fire extinguisher. It was not large, but it was heavy. She had one chance to change the script. The window was 20 stories up. The risk was absolute. But the alternative was his carefully crafted narrative. She lunged sideways, kicking the chair toward him as a distraction. She grabbed the extinguisher, the metal biting into her hands. Marcus flinched, surprised by her sudden, desperate action. She swung the extinguisher in a wide, powerful arc. It was aimed not at him, but at the enormous window. The thick glass shattered with an explosive, deafening roar. A violent gust of wind immediately ripped through the office. Dust, papers, and the scent of salt spray erupted into the room. The pressure change was immediate, staggering. Clara gasped, fighting to keep her balance in the sudden chaos. Marcus recoiled, shielding his face from the flying shards of glass. The $10 billion silence was obliterated by the sound of the gale. She did not wait for his recovery. She scrambled through the jagged opening, toward the narrow concrete ledge outside. The cold, biting wind snatched at her clothes. She was out, exposed to the night, suspended between the starry sky and the impossible drop. A siren began to wail far below, alerted by the blast of glass. Marcus was shouting something inside, his voice thin against the wind's fury. She could not hear him. She could only feel the rough concrete beneath her fingers. She began to crawl, moving along the narrow perimeter of the penthouse. The end of the ledge was less than 50 feet away. It led to the maintenance ladder. She had to reach it before he found a way to follow her. The ledge was slick with condensation. She looked down once, involuntarily, into the black abyss of the ocean. The 10 billion hole felt less terrifying than the 20-story fall. But she was alive. She was moving. And the truth was still locked away in her mind. The wind was an invisible, brutal force. It tried to peel her from the building with every furious gust. She pressed her body flat against the cold concrete. Her injured ankle screamed a sharp protest with every inch of movement. She dragged herself forward using her elbows and the tips of her fingers. She could feel the grit and sharp glass shards scraping her palms. Inside the office, Marcus stood at the jagged edge of the broken window. He was not rushing. He knew the ledge offered no escape but a straight drop. He held his phone high, still recording the dramatic, dangerous escape. He was documenting her demise. A powerful beam of white light suddenly cut through the darkness below. It was a security searchlight, sweeping the side of the skyscraper. It danced below her, getting closer, drawn by the sound of shattering glass. Clara froze again, flattening herself further into the shadow of the structural beam above. The light missed her by inches. She had maybe 2 minutes before the security team or police helicopters arrived. The maintenance ladder came into view. It was a vertical strip of metal, bolted securely to the corner. It looked like salvation. She reached the corner, her fingers finding the cold, reassuring rung. She swung her legs over the side, bracing against the rush of wind. She began the downward climb. The drop was infinite. Her fingers slipped on the wet metal. Panic surged, a cold tide in her veins. She tightened her grip, locking her elbows. She could hear Marcus's voice clearly now. He had stepped out onto the ledge near the shattered window. "Do not be a fool, Clara. There is no bottom," he yelled. His voice was carried away on the wind, but the malice remained. She ignored him, focusing only on the rhythm, reach, grip, descend. She moved down 5 stories, then 10. The wind eased slightly as she dropped below the penthouse's severe height. She risked a glance up. Marcus was gone from the edge. He was calling someone. Below her, the ground floor lights seemed miles away. She was passing a lower executive terrace. It was a large, landscaped balcony on the 10th floor. It offered a potential landing spot, a break in the sheer descent. She felt a buzzing vibration near her head. A small, dark drone, the size of a hawk, darted past. It held a blinking red light. It was not security. It was too small, too fast. It had flown straight out of the broken window above. Marcus was using a secondary camera. The drone was his eye, tracking her descent, filming her final moments. It circled back, hovering 10 feet away, a mechanical predator. She was completely exposed. It was filming her face. Clara knew that video would be edited to show a panicked, guilty flight. She reached the terrace level. The final gap was too wide to jump. She swung her body, gaining momentum against the metal ladder. She let go, launching herself into the air. She hit the rough concrete of the terrace railing hard. The impact jarred her teeth. She rolled over the railing, tumbling onto the soft, cool grass of the 10th floor garden. She was safe for a moment. The siren below was much louder now. The drone hovered above her, buzzing relentlessly, its lens fixed. Clara scrambled to her feet, finding an old terracotta planter filled with dirt. She grabbed it, using the last of her strength. She hurled the heavy pot upward toward the hovering machine. It struck the drone square in its rotor housing. The buzzing stopped instantly. The shattered pieces of the drone fell, scattering onto the grass around her. She had blinded him. But the temporary safety of the terrace would not last. She had to find an elevator, a stairwell, a way out of the building completely. She saw a door marked Maintenance Access. She pushed it open, plunging into the stale, dark concrete of the building's interior stairwell. The silence was deafening after the wind's roar. She was now 10 stories closer to the ground. The truth was still with her. She started running down the stairs, ignoring the sharp pain in her ankle. Her shoes scraped loudly on the concrete steps. She knew the police were coming, but they would be looking for a suicidal fugitive. She had to reach the lobby, disappear into the chaos, and tell the world about the 10 billion hole before Marcus found her again. She was running from the money, from the crime, and from the carefully staged video of her own disappearance. The stairwell smelled of dust and cold, damp concrete. The scent of saltwater and fear was quickly replaced by stale air. She pounded down the steps, 2 at a time. The steel banister felt cold and unforgiving in her hand. The echoing sound of her footsteps amplified her panic. She was a desperate drumming in the heart of the tower. She passed the 8th floor. The 6th. Her lungs burned with sharp, ragged breaths. A sudden thought chilled her more than the night air outside. Marcus knew where she was going. The only way out was the lobby. He would anticipate her movements. She had to divert. On the 5th floor landing, she stopped abruptly. She listened. Nothing but the frantic thudding of her own pulse. She forced herself to breathe deeply, slowly. She had to think like an accountant again, not a fugitive. She had to find a variable he could not predict. She quietly opened the stairwell door onto the 5th floor. This was the primary trading floor, usually alive with screens and voices. Now, it was utterly dark and still. Only the residual power indicator lights blinked softly, green and red. The floor smelled of ozone and forgotten coffee. She stepped out, moving silently onto the vast, open office space. She used the meager light from the moon-drenched windows for guidance. She hobbled past empty desks, each chair pushed neatly in. The silence here was different from the penthouse. This was a deliberate, organizational quiet. The silence of a company that had suddenly ceased to exist. She needed a distraction. She needed a signal. Her eyes locked onto a server rack nestled in a secure, glass-walled cage. The blinking lights of the servers were hypnotic. She pulled a sharp shard of glass from the scrape on her elbow. It was small, but razor-thin. She approached the server cage door. It was locked, of course. But the latch mechanism was old-fashioned. She slid the glass into the narrow gap, pushing the fragile locking pin. It slipped into the mechanism. She pressed harder, wincing as the glass bit into her thumb. A small, gratifying click echoed in the immense room. The cage door swung inward. She stepped inside, feeling the immediate blast of hot, circulated air. The noise level rose slightly, the mechanical groan of the cooling fans. She found the primary network switch. It was a dense block of blinking Ethernet cables. This was the central nervous system of the entire operation. She reached out, grabbing a handful of the cables. Her hand was slick with sweat and blood. She yanked them out violently. The sound was like 1,000 tiny whips cracking in unison. Instantly, the rhythmic blinking lights across the entire floor went dark. The sudden, absolute blackness was startling. She knew the alarm would trigger. The main power grid would immediately register the failure. Marcus would know her location. But so would everyone else. She raced out of the server cage, weaving through the darkened desks. She heard a distant sound from above. It was the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of a helicopter rotor. The police were here. And Marcus was still hunting. She saw a small red exit sign glowing weakly down a corridor. It promised a fire escape, a secondary way out. She limped toward it, pushing against the rising urgency in her chest. She slammed through the fire door, back into the concrete stairwell. She began descending again, but this time, she was moving with purpose. She was not just running from Marcus. She was running to the inevitable chaos of the arrest. The hole was a secret only if no one knew about the key. She was the key. She had to make it to the light. The ground floor felt tantalizingly close. A sudden voice echoed up the stairwell from below. It was not police. It was a deep, guttural, angry shout. It was not Marcus either. She stopped dead, listening. The second voice was a woman. It was frantic, demanding. The two voices were arguing, blocking the main path to the lobby. Clara realized she had run into another complication. She was not the only one in the building trying to escape the collapsing structure. The 10 billion hole was starting to draw out the rats. She had two options: go back up and risk Marcus, or descend into the confrontation below. She slowly pulled the fire door shut again, easing it softly back into the lock. She turned, looking for another exit. There was always another way out in a building this expensive. She found a small, unmarked wooden door next to the fire hose. She pressed her ear against the cool wood. Silence. She tried the handle. It was unlocked. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her with meticulous care. She was in a small, cramped utility closet. It was dark and smelled strongly of chlorine and industrial cleaner. A sliver of light showed beneath the door. She heard the voices below growing louder, more desperate. They were coming up the stairs. She realized with a jolt that the argument was about the missing 10 billion. The voices were fighting over who got what, who was to blame. They were accomplices. Clara's heart pounded against her ribs. She was trapped between two exits, both guarded by danger. She searched the small closet wildly. Her hands brushed against a mop, bucket, and then something cold and metallic. It was a heavy, 3-foot length of steel piping, meant for plumbing repair. She gripped it tightly, testing its weight. It was a weapon. The voices were almost at the 5th floor landing. She crouched low, breathing shallowly. She was waiting in the dark. The truth was heavy in her hand. The voices outside grew sharp, venomous. The woman's voice cut through the concrete quiet. You said it was clean. You promised it was untraceable. The man responded with a low, dangerous growl. Stop panicking, we have ours. The police are for show. Clara pressed her cheek against the cold steel pipe. The smell of bleach filled her nostrils. She could hear every syllable now, amplified by the stairwell's echo. They were standing directly against the fire door. The man laughed, a short, harsh sound. Marcus is upstairs playing hero. He will take the fall. Clara froze. Marcus was sacrificing himself, creating a distraction. But Marcus was still hunting her. The woman's voice dropped to a desperate whisper. That consultant. Clara. Is she secure? Clara's heart seized. They knew her name. They were involved in the 10 billion hole. She went over the side. Marcus is making a video. Suicide by panic. A wave of icy fury replaced Clara's fear. He was thorough. He planned to frame her for the entire collapse. The woman was not convinced. I do not trust him. What if she made it? The man moved. Clara heard a heavy, dragging sound, then a metal scrape. He was blocking the fire exit with something heavy. He was trapping her entire floor. Nobody is coming through that door. We go down and wait for the boat. The small utility door was their only blind spot. Clara slowly raised the pipe. The man's voice shifted, sounding curious. What is this smell? Clara knew the chlorine smell was strong. He was approaching the closet door. She adjusted her grip on the steel. The sliver of light beneath the door was momentarily blocked. A shadow loomed large, distorted. His hand reached out, fumbling for the knob. Clara held her breath, ready to strike. The knob turned, slowly, inexorably. The heavy wooden door began to open inward. She saw a patch of dark trouser fabric, then the edge of a polished leather shoe. He was looking down, not up. She swung the pipe. Not at his head, but low, a vicious, horizontal arc aimed at his knee. A sickening, dull thwack ripped the silence. The man yelled, a sudden, animalistic cry of pure pain. He stumbled backward into the stairwell. The woman screamed, a high, startled shriek. Clara lunged out of the closet, pipe raised high. She did not hesitate. The woman stood paralyzed, holding a large, sleek travel bag. Clara slammed the pipe against the woman's shoulder. The bag dropped instantly, hitting the concrete with a heavy, soft thud. The woman cried out, clutching her arm. The path was clear. Clara did not look back at the moaning man or the stunned woman. She ran past them, down the final flights of stairs. She hit the lobby floor. The vast, opulent lobby was a chaotic scene of blue flashing lights. Police officers were already moving, their uniforms dark and sharp. The main entrance doors were jammed open. She saw a cluster of people near the front desk. She had to find the one person who would listen. She saw a man in a rumpled suit, holding a legal pad. He looked like a liquidator, a lawyer, or a serious investigator. She limped toward him, weaving through the confusion. A uniformed officer tried to stop her. "Stop. Where are you coming from?" the officer demanded. Clara ignored him, her eyes fixed on the man with the legal pad. She reached the man, grabbing his jacket sleeve. Her voice was a rasp, raw from the fear and the effort. "They destroyed the server. 10 billion. I saw the number." She thrust her bloodied hand toward the man. The man looked at her, then at the blood, then at the chaos. He stared at the panic in her eyes. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice calm, methodical. "My name is Clara Vance. I am the auditor. Marcus is upstairs. He is filming my suicide." The lawyer's eyes widened, recognizing the gravity. He looked past her, toward the stairwell door she had just exited. The police were already running up the concrete steps. He looked down at her bloody, exhausted figure. "Tell me everything, Clara," he said, pulling her slightly into the shadow of the marble reception desk. The 10 billion hole was finally speaking. But the story was not over. Marcus was still upstairs, directing the narrative. And the helicopter was still circling, its searchlight sweeping the ground. She had the evidence, but she did not have safety. The lawyer, whose name tag read, J. Peterson, receiver, did not look away from Clara's eyes. His gaze was the calmest thing in the entire storm-swept lobby. He tightened his grip on the lapel of his rumpled suit and gently guided her to a sheltered corner behind a massive marble column. "Clara Vance, outside consultant for forensic review," he stated, reciting her bio from memory. "I was expecting a call. Not a physical manifestation of this disaster." He nodded slowly, taking in her bruised, bloodied state and the wild, exhausted look in her eyes. "Marcus. He's the chief operating officer. And the spreadsheet. Delta / final / internal. "Yes," Clara gasped, leaning against the cold stone. "He was planning, he was recording. To make it look like I jumped. He's staging it right now." Peterson didn't hesitate. He pulled a satellite phone from his inner jacket pocket, bypassing his dead cell phone. "We need a unit on the penthouse level, 20. COO's office. He is armed with a phone and a camera. He's attempting to tamper with the scene and frame the witness. Code, 10 billion hole confirmed." The phrase hung in the air, cold and unforgiving. The number that had driven Clara to near death was now a code word for the biggest financial fraud of the year. Within minutes, the lobby chaos began to shift. The police, who were initially focused on the broken window and the network failure, suddenly moved with coordinated urgency toward the elevator banks. The helicopter outside, previously a buzzing nuisance, now served a clear purpose: surveillance. A few minutes later, the two accomplices Clara had struck in the stairwell were led out, disheveled and cursing, their expensive getaway bag, now revealed to be filled with high-value bearer bonds and crypto hard wallets, slumped open on the floor. Peterson only glanced at them, his face unmoved. The true end came 20 minutes later. The elevator doors opened, and a team of officers emerged, flanking a figure in a dark suit. Marcus. He was calm, his face smooth and controlled, the perfect picture of an innocent executive being harassed. He still held the sleek silver phone, but the recording light was now off. His eyes, however, found Clara immediately. The mask of calm slipped for a fleeting, terrifying second. His look held not just malice, but a cold, burning sense of defeat. He had lost the narrative. Peterson stepped forward, his voice cutting through the lobby's noise like a steel wire. Mr. Vance, I am the court-appointed receiver for all assets and liabilities of this company. That includes you. Anything you say now will be recorded. Your scheme has failed. Clara watched as Marcus was cuffed, his shoulders finally slumping as he realized the weight of the whole was now exclusively his. The $10 billion had found its face. The aftermath was not an explosion, but a quiet, methodical dismantling. The arrest was just the opening shot. The **10 billion became the new lexicon for financial failure, a staggering, almost fictional sum that wiped out the life savings of millions of ordinary people across the globe. Clara spent the next 48 hours in a secure location, giving testimony. She detailed every minute, every log, every calculated move, starting with the moment she double-clicked the file. Her testimony was the forensic blueprint that federal prosecutors used to build the case. Weeks later, Clara stood on a different balcony, this one belonging to a modest, safe apartment in Miami, a temporary home paid for by the investigators. The ocean air here was different, less opulent, less fraught with danger. She was watching the news. The screen showed a grainy picture of the penthouse office, the jagged hole in the window patched with plywood. The news anchor spoke with a tone of hushed awe about the scale of the fraud, the complicity of the executives, and the unprecedented complexity of chasing a stolen fortune across untraceable digital ledgers. She knew they would never recover all of it. Money this vast, built on trust and moved with such deception, simply evaporated when exposed to the cold light of reality. The money was not just gone, it had never truly existed in the way people believed. It was debt masquerading as wealth, a pyramid of promises. Clara traced the faint scar on her hand from the glass shard she used to break the server cage lock. The cold steel pipe lay wrapped in a cloth in the bottom of a suitcase, a relic of the night she chose to fight instead of flee. She had survived the night, not by luck, but by reverting to her nature, methodical action under pressure. She had calculated the risk and acted on the data. She had gone from accountant to fugitive, and finally, to witness. The camera cut to a shot of the courtroom. Marcus was entering, his suit still expensive, his face now gaunt, stripped of its arrogance. Clara took a deep, steady breath. The debt had been paid, not in currency, but in consequence. The whole remained, a cautionary tale carved into the side of the Bahamian skyscraper. Her job as an auditor was finally over. Now, her life as a witness had just begun. She closed the blackout curtains, shutting out the sun. The silence was absolute. For the first time in weeks, it felt safe.